Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 discussion of the Iliopsoas complex in this episode. How are you going today, Soph?
Hey Raquel, I'm going good. We have only done a couple of mini series, so it's cool that we have a 2-part on this one. We tried to make it a 1-part episode, but there was too much to squeeze in, so we had to split it.
Yes, we would have been going for a good hour and a half, I think, so it's a good idea. Well, but it is such an important area and we want people to, have ways that they can manage it. So in this episode, we're going to talk about like ways that we can improve it and how you can strengthen it. So just a little bit of a recap on the Iliopsoas. So it's composing of the iliacus, the psoas major, and the psoas minor. And in the last episode, we talked a lot more in depth about the anatomy, diagnosis, and causes of dysfunction. Just to recap, what were some of those signs of dysfunction?
So as a general list, you've got hind limbs that are dragging. When horses snatch or take their legs away from the farrier and they hold them up underneath their tummy.
Yeah, or they have an inability to take them out behind.
Take them out behind. Reduced engagement, reduced lumbosacral flexion and extension. So you spoke about, when you do ask for test motion through slow reflexes, like they'll have difficulty flexing and extending the lumbosacral, or it's jerky. They can be camped under. They can have some tenderness or reactivity in front of the tubercoxy, the point of the hip, or in the flank area, through the lumbar, or up inside the groin. They have a lack of hind end strength, engagement, or impulsion, which you explained as what, where is the power coming from? Is the horse's leg out behind while they're trying to push themselves forward, or is it nice and secure underneath them like a pillar of strength? They can also have a weak top line and generalized hind end musculature that just doesn't have a nice balance.
Yeah, and specifically, when they've got those overdeveloped hamstrings and floppy, weak quadriceps area, those horses will not have healthy functioning psoas muscles either.
Definitely.
So we want to look for good strong quads and good strong glutes and a balance of musculature in that hind end, and then they're much more likely to have a well functioning iliopsoas complex. So, but most horses, we can improve them anyway, because many of our domestic horses have a poor functioning iliopsoas. And so first of all, we want to be able to recognize like signs of fatigue, because, we've said some of those signs of dysfunction there that you might recognize, but also like if you're out kind of riding your horse, doing things with your horse, how can you start to go, oh, maybe that's a point at which I should stop now. Maybe that's enough of that exercise.
So that might be a lack of straightness that comes through with your horse. They may, some horses, they start walking on like slightly 3 tracks. I know that I've seen that. And actually, it's mainly where I see it is my dog. She immediately goes to 3 tracks.
Yeah.
Once we're at the point where I'm like, I should have stopped, I'll walk her, I'll run 10 minutes ago. Then it's like a split second thing. She'll go to 3 tracks. Other things you might see are the pushing out behind, like we were just talking about with the lack of impulsion. The horse's pushing power comes while they're trailing out behind. What else?
Their head and neck position. So, if a horse is able to utilize that hind end appropriately and they're coming through from the hind, then generally the head and neck, like they'll be lifting through the base of the neck and able to extend and be open through the kind of gullet area. So if they start to hold it in quite a fixed position or hold it up, then that can be an indicator, especially if they were going softly and nice and they, and Jelly, I guess, has taught me a lot because, he needs to warm up, which we're going to talk about. And then I'll have a certain period of time where, he goes really nicely and where it's super easy. Like I can just sit there when he's really able to use his hind end well, I can just sit there. Like he lifts me up through his back and he reaches with his head and neck without dropping on the forehand. And you can feel the push coming from behind. But when he's not going so well, it's like the hind end is not pushing. And so either the head and neck goes down and it's just like what some people describe as long and low, but like the head and neck is pulling me a little bit, like he's heavier in the reins and he's kind of pushing into the reins rather than sitting there nicely. And the hind end kind of feels like it's not coming under the seat and he's not lifting his back underneath me. And I also feel like I have to push him more. Like he just loses that impulsion, and I especially see it on the ground. Like he'll do like little hind limb, like shorter hind limb steps instead of like big long pushing steps. So yeah, his transitions will turn to shit. Like he'll come down a transition and the hind limb will slide forward as opposed to him kind of supporting himself and coming down in the transition. So his hind limb will kind of slide forward, or he'll do one where as he comes downwards in the transition, his bum goes up and it's like quite a jerky, like just feels almost like he trips into the transition, but he's not tripping. And the canter, he'll get heavier. Like I think a lot of horses are quite heavy in the canter in terms of their front end. So a horse that has a well-functioning Iliopsoas, well, and obviously goes with the rest of the posture, but they'll be lifted and they'll be pushing and propelling in the canter. And so it won't feel like they're sitting in your hands and leaning on you at all. So I think those aspects are really important, and they shouldn't have tightness of their belly muscles. Like you shouldn't see a belly line because that's indicating that they're bracing for some reason, maybe from underlying iliopsoas weakness or injury. And they also shouldn't look like their belly is like fat, if that makes sense. Like sometimes people think their horses are fat, and I'm not saying they're not, like they might be a bit overweight, but often if they've got a weak core and their iliopsoas is not working properly and then their whole core is compromised, they look fat. And when you improve that, it's like they've lost weight, but they haven't necessarily lost weight. They're just now holding themselves like posturally strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, they're big ones. And if they start to drag a little bit more, if they weren't dragging and then they start to drag. So that's
definitely
ones.
How would you give somebody advice to improve their horse's iliopsoas?
Yeah, so the number one thing is function, right? So you want to get function first. So you need to, address any tension in that area. So with good body work, and also with the body work, making sure that it's always a whole horse focus, right? Like I never, unless I've got a specific injury, and I've used up all my time working on that area, I always want to kind of balance up the body throughout that session. And so, osteo, chiro, massage, in the EQ 100, like we have focused kind of moves. Myofascial release can be really beneficial as well, and making sure that you've got lumbosacropelvic hip function in there, like checking the groin, the pubic area. So definitely kind of starting with function, because if you don't have function, then you can't expect them to use it properly. So we want to make sure we have that. The other thing is that it's not all about the Iliopsoas. Like, we need to think about their ability for the hind end to come through. Like, some horses at what we call have the brakes on in front, and it may be from a chronic hind end injury and they've just loaded up their front end and then the brakes are now on so hard, or it might be from other things going on in the front end. But if the thoracic sling is not operating, they also can't bring through their hind end. So it's always balancing up both. And then the rectal examination to address any gelding scars or ovary dysfunctions, gelding scars internally or externally, or to address Iliopsoas injuries can be really beneficial. But we only have one vet in Australia, Dr. Louise Cosgrove, who is doing that at this stage. What else, Soph?
So something else that you can use to improve Iliopsoas is activations pre-work. That includes flexion and extension of the lumbosacral joint. Something that might be useful is belly lifts in conjunction with a solid warm-up. And, before you do those, because you don't want to be just straight into like cold flexion and extension and belly lifts in your horse. And you certainly don't want to be going out. If you're trying to improve, you certainly are not going to go out cold and try and do work that activates the Iliopsoas. It's important. I actually do find that with, after a bodywork session, even if you have a pelvis that's stuck and the lumbar and the sacrum are all quite jammed up and you get them moving, the horse doesn't automatically engage those muscles and use them, even though you have made that motion, you've set them up with an opportunity to make the most of the position they're in, to use themselves better. You're always aiming for a little bit better, not perfect, but with more comfort, because horses really live in their bodies and they're always, they want to be comfortable. So if you can show them that the motion has become more comfortable and it's available to them, then they can use it. But you actually have to show them sometimes. So after, when they're in a good state, being able to be like, okay, yep, no, like the pelvis can flex and extend now. And when you move, you will have that flow of motion there. So using a warm-up and dynamic stretches, especially if you're jumping. So the warm-up's really important. We've talked about this previously, having, a walk of 5 minutes or trotting of 15 minutes, walk 15 minutes, or trot of up to 5. In this instance, warming up with the trot and canter transitions for at least 5 minutes, and using carrot mobilization, so dynamic ones. You should listen to our episode on mobilizations, lengthening, and activations for a little bit of context here too. So you're just trying to warm up the muscle, get it lengthening and shortening, so that it's being used, and also that you're getting blood flow there, and you're also getting activation on a nervous level. Like the body recognizes, I have this muscle and I'm going to use it for this purpose. This joint angle opening and closing is very important. And then also after work, you can do post-work lengthening. So that for the Iliopsoas complex, that includes standing facing up a hill. So the legs are stretched out behind. So the insertion and the origin of the muscles the distance between them is increased. So the muscle has lengthened. And then also carrot mobilizations, or hind limb lengthenings, where you would pick the limb up and take it out behind. What else can you think of? Or to add?
Also, so with the activations, you need to understand how to do these properly. So it's not something, there's many kind of YouTube videos on them that I would say are not appropriate. Like, the horse has to not be bracing against you. Like, tail activations are so useful and they were a game changer for Jelly. But he's also shown me all the ways that you can cheat And so like he will, if he's not comfortable through his psoas or his hind end, then it feels like he's pulling against me instead of, so I think of an activation like a squat, and like an independent type of squat, you know, except we're using their tail to kind of create that half halt squat. But if you imagine, if someone was like pulling you forward when you're trying to do the squat, sometimes that's what he feels like he's pulling against me. Other times he'll step, and other times he will put his hind legs further out behind himself, so he's not having to do that activation correctly. So you've got to have a bit of an awareness of how they cheat, because otherwise you're just setting up for brace. It's a little bit easier with the belly lift and the pelvic rounding because you can see it, like you're beside them. Whereas with the tail activation, it can be a little bit harder because you've got to know how to feel it. And then with the, and also, as you mentioned, like with the post bodywork stuff and how we need to show them how they can do it. So I think I've seen dramatically improved results when I've incorporated that in my body work. So when I've incorporated something, sometimes I have to think outside the box to get horses to switch muscles on. But when I've incorporated something after my body work session, sometimes it's a tail activation, sometimes it's, I have a little sequence that I do that kind of gets the whole body connecting from a core perspective. Or it might be like the hind limb stepping in a specific way, which I know you've talked about that. I've had good experience with that as well. It might be backing up. Like it can be different. It depends how I think I need to get that particular horse to make a connection. And sometimes I've got to try a few different things for that horse, you know, so I'll be like, oh, that's still not working. Okay, try this, try that. So it's super important to set them up with a better pattern because like you said, otherwise they will often revert back to the neural pattern that's been in there maybe for years. Like even though I got Jelly's, you know, Iliopsoas looked at recently, his patterns have been there for who knows how long, 10 years maybe, like he's 15, maybe 10 years, maybe since he was gelded, maybe 12 years. Okay, so me doing like a rehab program, like obviously I've already been rehabbing him now for 2 years, and we're still on the improve. We haven't reached a definite plateau yet, but you can't expect to change a pattern that's been there for 10 years in an instant. And even if it does, you've then got to like repeat that pattern to make it become a strong neural pathway or a habitual pattern. Yeah. So that's really important. With Jelly too, he loves standing on the hill. But if they've got their hind legs out the back, you have to be really careful because sometimes what they'll do is they'll put their hind legs out the back, but they'll lean forward. And so often with Jelly, I want them not too far out behind. I want them so he's not leaning forward. So if they get too far out behind and they start looking like they're leaning forward, then I'll actually correct him and have them, often for him, I have them more under his hip. But that's because he has a chronically shortened Iliopsoas. Other horses might be able to have it further out and stay balanced in the front. And then another exercise I do is I let him eat on the side of the hill, but he has to stay square. And he's learning that because just if he moves, I just correct him. And so that just creates like a bit of a lengthening through a active motion. So he's doing it himself. And then I'll like, even today I did it this morning, and so I stood him on the side of the hill and he's eating, and then I moved from side to side and he did it himself, no carrots necessary. Like he actually does his own like lateral flexion exercises too now. So he's like, okay, now I do this one, now I do that one. And I just have to scratch him on the nose. And even this morning he offered it before I even, I was like, oh yeah, we should do that. He was like, oh yeah, I'm already doing it. So you can actually, you know, like he'll happily offer me those things, and if he didn't, then I'm like, okay, like he's restricted in there. So yeah, that's a nice way to do it. If, like, for me, I get to a point where I can't lift his hind limbs if my back is sore, and so I have to come up with other ways to create hind limb lengthening without me lifting his legs. And if he's sore and I'm sore, it's just not a good combination. So you've got to look after your own back there as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, so what about if we're talking about in motion? Because that's you can help them a lot in motion.
Definitely. So slow and controlled motion is very good, particularly because it's good for both assessing and then trying to make an improvement as well. So in slow and controlled movement, you can really tell how much control your horse's hind leg really has when they step up or up and across. You know, is it sloppy? Does it slap on the ground? Does it have to be really quick because they struggle to hold it up for very long? And when you're making improvements, slow and controlled movement means that you're really asking them to isolate and make the most of that motion. Through walk, the quality of the walk ties into that. The fact that, you know, when you're traveling around, we go right into this in the equine functional posture course, but being able to assess how well your horse's leg comes forward and also travels slightly medially, and what are the limitations to how forward and how medial can they take that leg while it's still a healthy motion, not a jerky overreach to try and please you. And then once you understand that, you can focus on where they have quality and then focus on quality over quantity while you build health and activation through that iliopsoas complex, so that it's essentially that muscle group is getting fitter and stronger and more dominant in their neuromuscular pattern. Part of that comes into stepping over poles. So just one pole to start with, focusing on quality over quantity again. How well can you get that motion over the pole with the hind limb in a controlled way that isn't them falling forward and rushing through? And then stepping through and across with the hind limb just for one step, whether that's over a pole or without the pole, just on a circle. One step is the foundation of good everything, really. One step. The control through one step is a really strong indicator, and we'll probably do an episode on the value of one step as well in the future. What are the other things that you believe makes a big difference in improving?
Backing up, but I think backing up is probably one of the harder exercises for horses. Like they don't do it as much in nature as some other exercises. Like they will do it though if they're fighting with another horse, like you'll see them back away, or if they're trying to kick them, they will back up in those situations. But it's not something they just kind of do on a routine basis. But the backing up needs to be straight and slow and controlled and without bracing, and with them lifting through the base of their neck. So Jelly's least favorite exercise is backing up. He finds it so difficult. It is the time when he will threaten to bite me, because it's really difficult for him. And so this morning I was practicing it too, and he was lucky to do 3 steps. And it did improve over the time, and then it got to a point where he started to show fatigue, and that was his limit. So he was able to maintain straightness, and then I got a bit more. I think I got up to maybe 5 steps in that situation where he stayed straight and soft, but then he was like, I'm tired now, and it actually got less. So in the future, like that would be my limit, like doing it however many times that I did it before he showed a deterioration. With a backup, a lot of people just look at the diagonal and that they're walking on the diagonal. But what you also need to look at is that their spine is flexing and the lumbosacral joint is flexing. They're lifting their legs. They're not kind of holding their head up and bracing so they can stay relaxed and lifted in the base of their neck. And they don't go side to side, because a lot of horses I see, they'll kind of like shimmy, almost like they'll go sideways and the spine actually stays really straight, and that's not using the iliopsoas. Like they have to lift the leg and go in a straight line backwards. And Ellie was the same, so I did it with her too. She could do more steps, but with the right hind, she was struggling to maintain the straightness. So, and you know, we're talking here, like those first few things that we've talked about are more the stability aspects of the psoas, like more the muscle fibers that are involved in posture. And they're the ones you need to work first. So if you don't have these foundations of being able to step forward and across, slow and controlled, changeability within the walk, backing up, stepping over a pole, stepping over multiple poles, if you don't have that in the walk, you can't expect the psoas to work properly in a higher gait. However, for jelly trotting, he has to trot often as a warm-up. So he needs to get that muscle kind of like what you talked about, the blood flowing.
Yeah.
And I used to have to trot him before I even hopped on him. So if I didn't spend, you know, at least 5 minutes warming him up in trot and just getting his hips working, I'd hop on and like and then activating, like he'd just feel like disconnected from his hind end. Now I can get straight on and just have a good walk and he feels fine. But for a long time, I had to trot him before I did anything. So that was just for him. Now I don't have to do that. He's in a much better place. So yeah, there are a few things. Then if we go into kind of moving more, so we've like looked at the slow and controlled stuff. So if we're going to like moving more, what do you have to say about that?
So going out with possibly an equiband as the next step. So promoting use of the core, the hind limbs, and like you're talking about, having the push be from a strong place, like a pillar underneath their body, rather than the push being far out behind them, which you do see sometimes even in higher level competition, particularly in dressage. Like you see this massive, like a real push out behind the horse's body, especially those horses who are really overbent. And even though they look upright, they're actually really on their forehand, and the hind limb just like trails out behind with this huge forelimb motion that you see. So using the equiband, starting at the walk and building slowly, once again, making sure that you're checking on your signs of fatigue so that you don't overload the psoas and it turns off and then you start using other muscles to move. You want to get to the point where it's being used well but not fatigued. Do you want to talk a little bit about hills and how you would use them well?
Yeah. I think hills are often recommended, you know, for hind limb strengthening, but I think a lot of horses are pushing out behind themselves and kind of pulling themselves up the hill. And jelly is a good example of that. So like if you're riding him up a hill, he just feels like he starts to pull you. You know, like I'll just feel him get heavier in my hand. And I can just feel his hind end is just then trailing along behind. So to use a hill appropriately, like you probably need to start with a walk and you should be able to lift them up in front and they should be able to like do a half halt as they're walking up the hill. If you can't stop them, they're probably on the forehand. I think the equiband could help. Like I'd probably get them used to the equiband and get them to the point where they're going consistently with that before I used hills, because then you can actually use it with the hills to keep that hind end underneath them. But again, if they start to get heavier in your hand, then they're struggling to push there. So I'd just be very mindful about the use of heels and really think about how your horse's balance changes when, you know, do they actually feel like they're pushing more from behind, or do they feel like they're pulling themselves up the hill? A really useful one is long reining. So, but what I find with the long reining is you really need a fence. So like I don't have an arena, I have a round yard, but even that you really need straight fence when you're long reining. And the reason for that is I long rein without a roller. I long rein just with 2 reins. I was taught by a rehab specialist in the UK, Thea Maxwell. And, you know, she taught me how to use the long reins to help the horse's balance. So we were using them to make sure the horse was lifting and was pushing from the hind limb. We were using that to help them get really correct straightness because we could see from behind. Whereas when you're on them, you know, we have all our influences and it's really difficult to get them pushing from behind correctly, you know, just with the weight on them. So yeah, I did a fair bit of it, you know, when I had like over in Wagga where there's an indoor arena and things, and gosh, it was amazing. I was teaching the students how to do it as well, and it was quite amazing to see how the horses' use of their body changed. Once we got them like lifting in front, then they started lengthening. We could get them to half halt. We could get them to do really good turns, like square turns. Square turns are really valuable as well. And you could kind of use the long reins to encourage that hind limb to come through. So the long reins themselves become quite a tool in that situation. If they're through a roller, you can't use them that way. Like you're a bit restricted because you can't take them out wide. It's harder to lift them up because it pulls their head down, and often you want to lift the head, like lift the front end up. But yeah, long reining, if you know how to long rein without other gear, highly beneficial. And yeah, I'll be giving that a go again with Ellie along my one little fence that I have no trees along. So yeah, so that's probably the main things in terms of activity and motion. I mean, canter is going to become very beneficial, but you know, so for Jelly, the canter is really difficult, and so it's like more about just the transition and then letting him come back, because once he gets fatigued, he'll hop behind, or he'll come down in the transition and I'll feel like that stumbly, trippy transition. Whereas when he's feeling good, it's like riding a rocking horse, like it's
Yeah.
beautiful. But yeah, everything has to be feeling really good for him to feel like that. So just be mindful that the canter will be good strength training and endurance training for your psoas, but you need it, like Sophie said before, you need to know that the psoas is actually working to then gain the benefit from cantering and gymnastics, jumping, variation. Like all those things are going to be more challenging and more strengthening, but the slow stuff is more about making sure that psoas is working and activating first. So you want to know that's really consistent in the slow stuff before you start to add in the strengthening work, half halts, transitions, all of those things. That's your building blocks later on for your endurance as well.
Definitely. So in part 1, we really touched on dysfunction, signs of dysfunction, what things are popping up. And here we're talking about sort of almost how to come back from recognizing, I think I possibly have an issue, I need to work through it. But on the topic of prevention, it would always be wonderful to either try and develop your young horses as balanced posturally as you possibly can, including the psoas muscles, and also to prevent injury, because muscles that are dysfunctional are at risk for getting injured when horses go, you know, they have thrills and spills, or, you know, you were talking about micro injuries that happen over and over. So thinking about prevention, to be injury resistant, having a supple and developed psoas, so, you know, if there is a small slip and the leg, you know, kind of slips along the ground out to the side, to have a psoas muscle that isn't under tension or in brace chronically, the muscle is much more likely to have the ability to lengthen without tearing, to be mobile, flexible, and to have that lengthening. And you're aiming for strength at the stretch. And so that means that when the horse is reaching, whether that's out behind or forward or in a different position, you actually have strength while the psoas muscles are lengthened and activated. And that's really good for preventing injuries. And of course, all of that comes together under good posture. So having a body alignment, so joints that have the ability to move through their range of motion and sit in a neutral when they're not being asked to move. So a good alignment that's appropriate for all the segments. We talked about the thoracic sling, we've talked about hip function, lumbosacral, all those spaces. And all of that combines to make sure that the psoas isn't overused or underengaged, that it just like when the body is trying to do a movement that uses the psoas for the motion that it's supposed to activate for, it's there and available to provide the level of strength, postural stability, or the endurance that's needed. And so even though the episodes are on the psoas, it's important to know that like the whole body has to come together because, the psoas, it's often disengaged as a result of other places in the body not working as well as they could have. Of course, we personally think that the equine functional posture course is a fantastic place to start if you either have a young horse that you want to develop or you have a horse that has room for improvement in with their psoas muscles. What do you think as a recap about training posture on the ground before riding or while you have a riding horse?
Yeah, I think that's really important. So recognizing what good core posture is a good prevention. So understanding how you can pick up those signs and what it should be before you get to riding. And then making sure that like your hoof balance and your saddle fit are supporting optimal biomechanics. And that that you just get that core development before you ask them to take a load, I think. And that goes for even horses that have been out of work. Like it's not just young horses, like horses that have been out of work, whether it's for an injury, whether it's just they've had time off, getting their core working appropriately before you load them up is just going to help so much once you kind of go into riding, and just understanding how they should function is very preventative. So like, if we can prehab them, that's going to be the best and avoid any injuries. Like Sophie said, they have strength at stretch, they have adaptability, they can withstand some weird steps and be okay with it. Recognizing signs of fatigue so that you can avoid it while the psoas is developing, and just checking, like I check Jelly before I hop on him. So I have a little like regime that I run through. I check his pelvic rounding, I check his belly lift, I check that he's lifting at the base of the neck, I check how he's stepping with those hind limbs. I check all of those things to then go, yep, he's gonna be fine, or no, he's not. And I can tell you the times when I haven't checked, I've got on and I've gone, ugh, like that doesn't feel so good. And I, always do the activations before I ride. And I know when I do my carrot stretches and spinal mobilizations post riding, like how much better he is after that as well. So having a bit of a, just a general regime that you do pre and post work, where you can assess your horse and leave them in the best possible place, is really, really important. And it's the quality over quantity, always, you don't have to work your horse 7 days a week for long periods of time. Like there is a point at which you want to build endurance, for different disciplines. However, in the early stages, less is more often. And yeah, I think we generally overtrain horses because it's just historically that's the way it's been. Like they actually maintain their fitness very well, and we need to understand our aims when training so that we can optimize that time. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
No, I think that was quite comprehensive.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm glad we split this into 2 parts. There's a lot to say, but thanks for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights.
We'll see you in the next exciting episode.